Tina Marais. I'm a Canadian artist living and working in France. What really inspired me about the theme of the Broken and Repaired exhibition as a textile artist is that this seems to be really so integral in the way that we work in our studio practice. We, or I, recover a lot of materials. And stitching is, in a way of mending. You are constantly joining things together and making something new and whole. So it's a slow process of repair, which I think any process of loss, of pain, any experience that we go through in life is something that requires slow mending. There is nothing fast that we can do about this process. My piece in the exhibition, Broken and Repaired at Timeless Textiles, is really inspired by a personal story. I got quite ill a few years ago, and I had to go through 4 surgeries in the past 4 years. And there's something related in the idea of scar tissue and of mending textile. It's the same method that we use when we mend skin, when we join a surgical cut together, that we use when we sew. And I really like this relationship. So at the time, I was working with a friend that's a photographer, and she was doing a lot of research about skin, and I was working with skin and the minerals contained in skin, so that interaction between the skin and the outside world. And then I was also working with an osteopath that was an incredibly inspiring woman, and she did a lot of research on fascia, and how fascia underneath the skin needs to be mended first if you really want the body to mend, because this is what holds everything together. And I found this really poetic. So she took some photographs of my scar during the process. And I've always wanted to do something with this. And in the same vein, we kind of want to put things aside and away and hide it. And we want to move on with life and somehow bury that. But I think I reached a point where I needed to mend it or sew over it and reveal it to be able to recreate and to put it to rest, if I can put it like that. So for my piece, I used this inspiration, this photograph. And then at the time as well, I was exploring ceramics within my textile practice. And I had a piece that I made that was like a scar that's pulling open, because that's what it feels like when you have a scar that's busy healing. You constantly feel the tension of the opening, of the skin wanting to open up. And it's just these threads holding it together. And this is quite metaphorical for how we feel when we go through difficult times in our life. It's like a wound that just wants to split open, but it's held together by a very thin thread. So I use these 2 objects as the basis for the inspiration. But the piece in the end, I worked with layering, and I wanted to have this feeling of the scar being revealed. So it's held together by stitches, but it can be moved freely within that context. So I worked with layered fabric. This is a technique that I have used before that I revisit on occasion. For the theme of the work and the exhibition and the feeling, I think I really felt that this process will, through its work, its labor that we feel, because labor can also be healing, will be really fundamental to the theme of the exhibition. So I worked with reclaimed linen, French linen, from old bed sheets. So it's that idea of a bed also being a place of rest, a place of healing, a place of recovery, and a place of intimacy and privacy. And then I worked with all kinds of different leftover materials, so silk, organza, all coming from different places. So it's that idea that we are not alone in our healing process. We have fragments that we gather, or different people that are significant in that time that take care. And I layered this. I chose really fleshy colors. So you layer this. I stitch through it as a quilting process, and then I cut open and I shred. And I think there's something about shredding textiles in a process of releasing trauma that is a very healing. So breaking it, but in the same way, mending ourselves through this physical act of shredding. That's really like a release, and putting that tension into the work, but releasing it from the body. And I worked in two pieces that I then assembled in on the bias in an abstract sense on one side, because I try to avoid working in just a square, because I think life is not as linear as we would like to think it is, and that there are always these diagonal shifts of tension that happen. And I was very pleased with the way that the materials interacted with each other in the end result. And it is not a direct interpretation of the objects that I chose that were broken, but it more informed a process to create something new through an emotional mending and release. So in the construction of this work, as I'm shredding, and I know with this process you can't just throw something in the washing machine, but as I like being physically involved with my work, I think it's also part of my process to do this dance with the materials and really being physically engaged. I use really rugged metal brushes, and if you're not careful, you actually stab your fingers. So it's a very labor intensive but very physical act in the creation. And then at the end, I use stitches, picking up those colors, that idea of mending the wound, but not on the wound, beside it, because we cannot ever really erase trauma, but we learn to live over it. So we always are weaving thin threads that reconnect and hold together. So around the base of the artwork, I did some of these really loose, intuitive stitches with embroidery thread. I tend to never work with very fine embroidery. It's a gestural thing. I think my gestures when I use embroidery thread is far more intuitive and almost primitive. And that just speaks to my work and my process. But I like it that you can almost feel the effort in the stitches, because it's thicker thread. They're random. It's a little bit like advancing a little bit every day, and sometimes we advance sideways, and then sometimes we advance forward. It was such a pleasure to create this piece and to really think of the theme that was so delicately thought out and meaningfully presented for the exhibition.
I'm so grateful that you were part of this exhibition. Your work is beautiful. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you.